The laughter stopped when Sammy Davis Jr. realized the hotel owner wasn't joking. At first, it sounded like another Vegas punchline, the kind that floated between tables and disappeared under music and glasses. But then Sammy's smile tightened. The man in the front row repeated it, louder this time. A few people chuckled nervously. Others looked down at their drinks. Nobody stepped in. Not the waiters. Not the band. Not the men who worked for the casino. Because the insult had come from someone you didn't challenge. Sammy stood there alone under the lights. Dean Martin sat just off stage, swirling the ice in his glass, watching the moment stretch longer than it should have. He knew the rules. Everyone in Vegas did. You didn't confront the people who owned the room. But then Dean set his glass down. And what he did next was so calm, so quiet, that it took a few seconds for the audience to understand what had just happened. By then, the balance in the room had already changed. Las Vegas was still laughing when Sammy Davis Jr.'s smile suddenly stopped. At first, it sounded like another joke from the front tables, the kind powerful men tossed around when the drinks were flowing and the music was loud. But then the hotel owner leaned forward and repeated it. This time, Sammy didn't laugh. The band hesitated. A few people looked down at their glasses, and for a moment, the room felt smaller. Dean Martin noticed. He didn't move right away. He just watched, holding his drink, letting the silence stretch longer than anyone expected. And then Dean did something so quiet that half the audience missed it. But the men who ran that hotel never forgot it. In that room, nobody interrupted men like him. The hotel owner sat at the best table in the house, front row, just off the stage, where the performers could see him and everyone else could see that he was meant to be seen. In Las Vegas during the early 1960s, those tables weren't just expensive. They were signals. They told you who made the rules, who signed the checks, and who could quietly end a career without ever raising their voice. And everyone knew it. Singers smiled at those tables. Comedians worked around them. Even headliners understood the balance. Keep the show moving, keep the owner happy, and never let tension reach the lights. Dean Martin knew those rules better than anyone. He'd built a career on smoothness, effortless charm. The man who never looked bothered, never pushed too hard, never made the night uncomfortable. Casinos loved Dean because he made everything feel easy, and easy kept the money flowing. But that night, the insult didn't land on just another performer. It landed on Sammy Davis Jr. And Sammy wasn't just part of the act. He was part of Dean's circle, someone who had fought harder than most just to stand under those lights in the first place. Sammy already worked rooms where some doors still opened slowly, where some audiences still watched him a little differently, where respect had to be earned every single night. Dean knew all of that, which meant if he stepped in now, he wasn't just protecting a friend. He was challenging the man who owned the room, and risking the very thing Las Vegas valued most, smoothness. Because once Dean broke the rules, there would be no easy way to smooth it over. It started small. Sammy Davis Jr. had just finished a quick run of impressions, the kind that always warmed up a Vegas crowd. A few celebrities in the room got playful jabs. The band hit a soft flourish, and the audience leaned forward, relaxed and ready for the next bit. That's when the hotel owner called out. Not loud enough to stop the show, just loud enough for the front tables to hear. Sammy smiled automatically, the way seasoned performers do when something unexpected comes from the crowd. He leaned toward the table, ready to turn it into a joke, ready to keep the rhythm moving. The owner said something short. A few men at his table chuckled. Sammy's smile tightened, just slightly, and he answered with a quick comeback, trying to glide past it. The audience laughed again, and for a moment, it looked like the moment would disappear the way these things usually did. But the owner didn't let it go. He leaned back, took a slow sip of his drink, and then repeated the remark, louder this time, enough for nearby tables to hear. The words carried just far enough to make the laughter uneven. Some people laughed. Some didn't. The band hesitated for half a beat before picking back up. Sammy shifted his weight, still smiling, still professional, but now the rhythm was off. He fired another quick joke back, trying to turn the owner into the punchline. It worked, barely, and the audience followed along, though the laughter felt thinner now. Dean Martin, sitting just off stage, watched it all without changing expression. He swirled the ice in his glass once, slowly, and kept his eyes on Sammy. because Dean knew something the room didn't want to admit. When a powerful man kept pushing, it usually meant he wasn't finished yet. And he wasn't. A few minutes later, as Sammy moved into a song, the owner leaned forward again. This time, he didn't bother disguising it as a joke. He said something sharp enough that the band faltered again, a line that cut through the music and landed directly under the spotlight. Sammy paused, just for a second, long enough for the audience to feel it. He tried to recover, stepping into the first verse, but the energy had shifted. The room felt divided now. Some people watching Sammy, others watching the owner, everyone sensing that something uncomfortable was unfolding. Dean stopped swirling his drink. He set the glass down gently on the table beside him, because this was no longer a heckle. It was becoming a performance of its own, one where the most powerful man in the room was slowly trying to shrink the man on stage. Sammy kept singing, but Dean noticed something else. Sammy's eyes didn't move toward the owner anymore. He was staring straight ahead now, focused on finishing the song, as if acknowledging the table again might only make things worse. The audience felt it too. The applause at the end of the verse came late, scattered, uneven, and that's when the owner crossed the line. He said something again, louder, clearer, no longer pretending it was playful. The words reached the back tables. The band stopped completely. Sammy stood there under the lights, hands at his sides, caught between professionalism and humiliation. Dean kept his expression calm, but he had stopped smiling, and that's when the room realized he was about to do something. The silence didn't come all at once. It spread. First, the band members lowered their instruments, one by one, like they weren't sure whether the song had ended or simply stalled. A trumpet player looked toward the piano. The piano player looked toward Sammy. Nobody looked at the front table, except Dean. Sammy stood under the lights, waiting, not for permission, but for the moment to pass. Performers learn that instinct early. Let the tension breathe. Let the room decide whether it wants to return to the show. But the room didn't decide. The hotel owner leaned back in his chair, relaxed, almost amused, like he'd just reminded everyone who paid for the lights above Sammy's head. A few people at nearby tables shifted uncomfortably. One couple stopped clapping mid-gesture. A waiter, halfway through pouring a drink, froze and then slowly set the bottle down instead. No one wanted to be seen choosing sides. Dean picked up his cigarette. He didn't light it right away. He rolled it once between his fingers, eyes still fixed on the stage. His glass sat untouched beside him now, the ice melting slowly, the condensation sliding down onto the tablecloth. Sammy tried to restart. He lifted the microphone again, gave a quick smile, and said something light, a small joke meant to pull the room back. A few scattered laughs answered him, but they faded quickly, because the owner leaned forward again. This time, he didn't even bother lowering his voice. The words cut through the room. Sammy's smile disappeared completely. For a second, he looked like he might answer back, really answer back, but then he caught himself. His shoulders eased, and he nodded once, the quiet signal performers use when they choose professionalism over pride. He brought the microphone closer, but before he could speak, Dean moved. Not fast, not dramatic. He simply set his cigarette down. Then he stood. At first, only the front tables noticed. Chairs creaked softly as a few people shifted to see what he was doing. Dean adjusted his jacket, the same unhurried motion he used when walking on stage every other night. Sammy saw him. Just for a moment, their eyes met. Sammy looked like he expected Dean to do what everyone else would do. Maybe crack a joke, maybe smooth things over, maybe pretend nothing had happened, because that's what Dean Martin always did. Smooth, easy, untouched by conflict. Dean stepped forward anyway. The microphone cable stretched slightly as Sammy held it, unsure now whether to continue or step back. The band members watched carefully, instruments still lowered, waiting for a signal. The owner noticed too. He leaned back further in his chair, confident, almost curious, like he was about to watch Dean rescue the moment, and in doing so, quietly confirm who still controlled the room. Dean stopped just beside Sammy. He didn't take the microphone. He didn't look at the band. He didn't even look at the audience. Instead, he turned his gaze directly toward the front table. And suddenly, the room felt smaller than it had all night. Dean didn't raise his voice. He didn't rush. He simply stepped closer to Sammy, and then, without asking, reached over and took the microphone gently from his hand. The movement was so calm it almost looked rehearsed. For a second, nobody reacted. Dean held the microphone low, not speaking yet. He glanced once at Sammy, a small, quiet gesture, then turned his attention back to the front table. The hotel owner watched him, still relaxed, still confident. Dean finally spoke. Softly, "If Sammy's not welcome," he said, almost conversationally, "then neither am I." No anger, no threat, just the words. The sentence landed harder than anything shouted could have. A few people in the room straightened in their chairs. The band members looked at each other. One of the waiters slowly stepped back from the table he'd been serving, as if he suddenly didn't want to be standing in the middle of whatever came next. Dean handed the microphone back to Sammy. Then he reached for his drink, and instead of returning to his seat, Dean remained standing beside Sammy, saying nothing more. The message was already clear. The owner's smile faded, because this wasn't a joke, and it wasn't a confrontation either. It was something far more dangerous in a room built on appearances. Dean Martin had just drawn a line, and he'd done it quietly enough that the entire room felt it at once. For the first time that night, the most powerful man in the room didn't look in control anymore. For a moment, no one moved. The band stayed frozen. Glasses sat untouched. Even the low murmur that usually filled a Vegas showroom seemed to disappear, like the air itself was waiting to see what the owner would do next. Because everyone understood what Dean had just risked. Casinos didn't just hire entertainers, they controlled access. One quiet phone call could make bookings disappear. One uncomfortable reputation could turn a headliner into a problem no one wanted to deal with. Dean Martin knew that, and he'd just chosen a side anyway. The hotel owner shifted in his chair, the relaxed confidence from earlier gone now. He glanced around the room, maybe expecting someone to laugh it off, maybe expecting Dean to break the tension with a joke. But Dean didn't. He stood beside Sammy calm, holding his drink, as if he had all the time in the world. Sammy, still under the lights, looked smaller a moment earlier. Now, standing next to Dean, the balance felt different. The humiliation that had been building all night no longer belonged to him. It had moved. A man at a nearby table began clapping, slowly at first, uncertain whether he was crossing a line. Then another joined in. The applause spread carefully, like people were testing whether it was safe. Dean didn't acknowledge it. He just remained where he was. The owner leaned forward, his voice quieter now, saying something that didn't quite carry beyond his table. One of the men beside him nodded quickly, and a forced laugh followed, the kind meant to smooth over a moment already too public to hide. Sammy looked toward Dean. Dean gave the smallest nod. Sammy lifted the microphone again, took a breath, and restarted the show. The band followed immediately, almost relieved to have direction again. The music filled the room, and the tension began to loosen. But something had changed. The owner didn't interrupt again. He sat back, quieter now, sipping his drink, no longer trying to control the stage. And people noticed. The front tables that once leaned toward him now seemed more focused on the stage, on Sammy, on Dean standing just nearby. When Dean finally returned to his seat, the respect in the room felt heavier than applause, because everyone understood what they had just seen. Dean Martin hadn't shouted. He hadn't threatened. He hadn't even argued. He had simply made it clear that if Sammy Davis Jr. didn't belong in that room, then the show, and the prestige that came with it, didn't belong there either. And in Las Vegas, that kind of quiet leverage was more powerful than any confrontation. But there was still a cost, because word traveled fast in those rooms. And by the end of the night, everyone would know that Dean Martin had chosen loyalty over convenience, and challenged a man who wasn't used to being challenged at all. By the time the night ended, nothing else was said about it. Sammy finished the show. The band packed up. The crowd filtered out into the neon glow of Las Vegas, carrying the story quietly with them. No headlines, no announcements, just whispers moving from table to table, casino to casino. Dean Martin left the same way he always did, calm, unbothered, like nothing unusual had happened. But the people in that room knew better, because in a city built on power, Dean had just shown a different kind of strength. He didn't embarrass the owner. He didn't escalate the moment. He simply made it clear that respect wasn't negotiable. Not for his friend. Not for anyone standing under those lights. And Sammy understood it too. There were bigger men in Las Vegas. Richer men. Louder men. But that night, the smoothest man in the room had been the one willing to make silence uncomfortable. That's what people often missed about Dean Martin. The voice was effortless. The jokes felt easy. The drink in his hand made everything look relaxed. But when someone weaker was cornered, Dean had a way of making power look small. And in a city where everyone watched who stood alone, Dean Martin made sure Sammy Davis Jr. never did. And that may be the real reason the room never forgot him.